Panama City is the national capital of Panama. While approaching its airport, you can see the skyline from the airplane. It feels more like Miami. Panama City is the most modern city not only in Panama but in the rest of Central America. Panama City has been an incredibly popular tourist destination. You can find all kinds of restaurants and casinos here. Recently, Panama City has been given the unofficial title of the Dubai of Latin America due to the recent rapid influx of skyscrapers, high-rise buildings, and increasing number of wealthy people in the city. This city has both the vibrant metropolis and a tropical escape. Many worlds coexist here. Welcoming both East and West, Panama is a regional hub of trade and immigration. The resulting cultural cocktail forges a refreshing, anything goes attitude, more dynamic and fluid than its neighbors. Like most of Latin America, Spanish is the primary language in Panama City, but because of its legacy as a vital international trade connection, you will also find that there is a multicultural, expatriate population that speaks English too. Highways have tolls that use a system of RFID, electronic cards for payments, to open the toll gate. As of April 2014, there is a new metro or subway system in operation. It is safe, clean, and economical way to travel. In Panama City, a good majority of retailers will accept credit cards, while ATMs are common around the city. Temperatures in Panama City are quite stable throughout the year, with hot days that often rise to 95 degrees Fahrenheit and rarely dropping below 64 degrees Fahrenheit. The dry season is fairly short, running from December to April, with the remainder of the year experiences a fair amount of rain. Panama City has always been a popular retirement destination, particularly for US and Canadian citizens. Panama has many different types of immigration visas and residency programs offering permanent residency, and in many cases full citizenship with a passport. They have recently created a friendly nation visa where currently citizens of 47 countries considered as friends can apply for permanent residency and become Panama citizens. One of the visas that Panama offers is pensionado or retired visa. Anyone over 18 years of age, yes, only 18 years old, can qualify for this visa by providing that he or she is receiving a lifetime minimum $1,000 per month payment. An exception to this minimum amount is that when the applicant purchases Panama real estate valued at least $100,000, the minimum monthly amount is reduced to $750. That's the reason many foreigners have bought apartments facing ocean. They either live in their home country or live at some other place in the city or in the country. They rent these apartments and get a decent monthly income. Some rent to tourists on a weekly basis. I always prefer to rent these apartments because they are not only cheaper but also provide a great view of the ocean. One of the most expensive apartments in Panama City are in Trump Ocean Club Tower. Just to give you an example, you can rent an apartment on 61st floor in Trump Ocean Club Tower for less than $100 per night. That's really cheap. Panama also offers the Panama Reforestation Visa. A foreigner must invest a minimum of $80,000 in a reforestation project that goes towards purchasing a minimum of 5 acres of forest land. This investment can be very profitable. Many investors plant mahogany or teak trees. harvest them in 15 to 20 years, and replant more trees in their place. These investments yield roughly $400,000 in 20 years, which is a huge profit. Besides, one doesn't have to become a farmer to invest in Panama restoration programs. The companies who are government certified will sell you the required minimum acres and do the maintenance during the full life of the investment. This involves thinning and selling thinned lumber, harvesting upon maturity, and selling the wood at market value. 5 years in the country, and no matter what kind of residency visa you have, you can apply for Panamanian citizenship. Panama is a great place to invest in because it has favorable incorporation laws, do not require paid-in capital, uses the US dollar as its legal currency, and its offshore corporations conduct business outside of Panama. Many people around the world hide their money by investing through Panama corporations. Now, let me take you to Casco Viejo. In English, it means the Old Quarter. Panama City was founded in 1519 and it lasted 152 years. During this time, the town was affected by slave rebellion, fire, and earthquake. In January 1671, the governor Juan Perez de Guzman had it set on fire before the attack and looting by pirate Henry Morgan. Later, the residents and settlers, desperate for a safer and easier location to defend themselves against future siege, decided on what is now Casco Viejo. This unique walled city, consisting of 16th and 17th century Spanish colonial architecture, is a gem which was unknown to most of the outside world until 1997, when UNESCO named Casco Viejo a World Heritage Site. Casco Viejo is the second only to Panama Canal as a tourist destination in Panama. However, the streets are not crowded with tourists and there are not the typical solicitors in the streets as you would find in many other cities in Central America. Strolling about this 337-year-old neighborhood, enjoy both history and contemporary local culture. Every corner has something of historical significance or local color. The Casco Viejo's narrow brick streets and wrought iron balconies evoke vision of Panama's glorious history as a major trade center. A stroll here offers opportunities to admire a beautiful mix of Spanish colonial and neoclassical architecture, as though many of its buildings are in a lamentable state of neglect and some of the neighborhood is poor. It's nevertheless a lively and colorful place. Cruising the streets, you will see several markets selling souvenirs and handmade crafts, as well as jewelry, pearls, and colorful traditional tapestries called molas. Casco Viejo has plenty of large open-air plazas where locals and tourists alike hang out, relax, and enjoy a coffee or beer. Check out Plaza Bolivar, which is surrounded by beautiful restored buildings from the 19th century. Plaza Herrera has a more local and rough feel, and directly in front of the Cathedral Metropolitana, in the very heart of this barrio, is the popular Plaza de la Independencia, also called Plaza de la Catedral. Panama is a Catholic country, so you will find a lot of beautiful old churches here. Some are impressive from the outside, others from the inside, while some are beautiful both in and out. The Church of San Jose in Casco Viejo, or La Iglesia de San Jose, is one of the most prominent points of interest in the old city. It is home to the famous Golden Altar. The outside of the building will almost make you think that you are in the wrong place, as its exterior is not nearly as ornate as its golden altar inside. The golden altar is actually made of carved wood that was overlaid with gold flakes. The Altar de Oro was originally inside a church, Panama la Vieja. Legend has it that when the English pirate Henry Morgan attacked the city, the priests painted the golden altar black to hide the gold from the pirates. After Morgan sacked and burned Panama la Vieja by the order of Saint Augustine, the altar was moved to the new church in Casco Viejo, its present-day location. Inside the bell tower is where you will find the altar. Also, side altars made of hand-carved wood and covered with gold flakes are located all about in the church. Stainless glass covers the windows. Tourists are allowed to visit the church and snap photos of the altar. The idea of creating a water passage across Panama to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans dates back to at least the 1500s, when King Charles I of Spain asked his regional governor to survey a route along the Charges River. The realization of such a route across the mountains jungle terrain was deemed impossible. France was ultimately the first country to attempt the task, led by Count Ferdinand de Lesseps, the builder of the Suez Canal in Egypt. The construction team broke ground on a planned sea-level canal in 1880. The French soon comprehended the monumental challenge ahead of them. Along with the torrential rains that caused heavy landslides, there was no effective means of combating the spread of yellow fever and malaria. They soon realized that a sea-level canal was too difficult and reorganized efforts towards a log canal. But funding was pulled from the project in 1888. Later, the U.S. purchased the French assets in the Canal Zone for $40 million in 1902. When a proposed treaty over rights to build in what was then a Colombian territory was rejected, the U.S. threw its military weight behind a Panamanian independent movement, eventually negotiating a deal with the new government in 1903 that gave them right in perpetuity to the canal zone. The Americans devised plans for a sea-level canal along the roughly 50-mile stretch from Colon to Panama City. The project officially commenced with a ceremony on May 4, 1904, but encountered immediate problems. Many of the French equipment was in need of repair, while the spread of yellow fever and malaria was frightening of the workforce. Then the U.S. recruited West Indian laborers, ordered new equipment, and devised efficient methods to speed up work. They also quickly recognized that a log canal was best for the terrain. Excavation of nearly 9-mile stretch became an around-the-clock operation, with up to 6,000 men contributing at any one time. Construction of the locks began with the pouring of concrete in August 1909. Built in pairs, with each chamber measuring 110 feet wide by 1,000 feet long, the locks were embedded with culverts that leveraged gravity to raise and lower water levels. The Panama Canal officially opened on August 15, 1914. Completed at a cost of more than $350 million, it was the most expensive construction project in the U.S. history to that point. This canal provided a vital component to expanding global trade routes in the 20th century. The transition to local oversight began with the 1977 treaty signed by the U.S. President Jimmy Carter and Panama leader Omar Torrijos, with the Panama Canal Authority assuming full control on December 31, 1999. This canal was recognized as one of the seven wonders of the modern world in 1994. The canal hosted its 1 millionth passing ship in September 2010. The Panama Canal operates using a system of 3 locks. In order to cross from the Atlantic to Pacific or vice versa, ships must travel through Gatun Lake, which is 85 feet above sea level. The locks raise and lower the ships from sea level in order to travel the lake. It takes ships an average of 8 to 10 hours to travel the Panama Canal. This compares to 2 weeks if a ship tries to bypass the canal and travel around South America. Ships are charged a toll based on their weight. The average toll for a ship to travel the canal is $150,000, but it can get much more expensive for the larger ships. 13,000 to 14,000 vessels pass through the Panama Canal each year at a rate of about 30 to 40 per day. The Panama Canal takes in about $2 billion a year in revenue. The last time I was here, my tour was served with a lunch in a town named Cinchona. I had some suspicion and wanted to know what it meant. An old local lady who owned the restaurant took me across the street and showed me a small tree. She told me that this is Cinchona tree and the town is named after this tree. On this trip, I searched the Cinchona town, which was supposed to be nearby. Even had police officers radio their headquarters to find out, but all of my efforts came empty-handed. An estimated 12,000 workers had died during the construction of Panama Railway and over 25,000 during the effort to build Panama Canal. Most of them died due to malaria. The locals told them to use cinchona bark, boil it, and drink it. That stopped them from malaria. I was thinking to how much knowledge has been destroyed that the indigenous medicine people had, just like the town of Cinchona. Jungles around here may have countless trees that may have cure for thousands of diseases, including cancer. We do not know. We may never know. The last time I came to Panama, I visited Imbara tribe people. For the sake of this video, I decided to go there again. I rented a taxi to take me there to make the video process easy. First, we had to go to Colon, and that was about 85 kilometers. Then getting to the Chagres River from Colon was a rough ride. The roads are unpaved in places, and there are plenty of potholes. Thankfully, there had been no rain, so we didn't have to contend with mud. Let me brief you a little about Imbara tribe. There are about 8 indigenous or native tribes living in Panama, including Imbaras. The Imbara people, also known as the Choco or Catio Indians, mostly living in the western Colombia and eastern Panama. As per the 2010 census, they make up 12.3% of the overall population. The Imbara language is not a single language, but a group of mutually intelligible languages spoken throughout Panama and Colombia. For the Panamanian Embera, the Chocos and its river systems remain their ancestral homelands, and the different dialects of the Embera language still mostly correspond to different parts of that area and its river systems. In the late 1700s, the Emberas began migrating from the Choco region of modern-day Colombia to what is currently the Darien province of Panama, which had been home to the Guna people at the time of European contact. This migration was prompted by the Spanish and took the form of a conflict between the Embera and the Guna. The Darien has subsequently become recognized as the homelands of the Embera in Panama. Eventually, we arrived at the Chagres River. Here, days are very hot and humid, and today was no different. Most people come here on an organized tour. One cannot just show up there and expect to get a tour. My driver had called the night before and had arranged a tour for me. After drinking lots of cold water, we got on a boat that could take us farther in the rainforest. These are really motorized dugout canoes. As the boat trip upriver continues, let me tell you a little about the history of Embera tribe. Panama seceded from the Republic of Colombia, achieving its independence in 1903. This time period observed the influence of missionaries and the involvement of the revolutionary government of Omar Torrijos, who actively sought to integrate the indigenous population of Darien into Panamanian society. This initiated the transition of the Embera people, who until that time had lived dispersed in small family units throughout the rainforest, into settled communities. The water needs of the Panama Canal and electrical needs of its booming capital have also modified the landscape with the construction of dams and two artificial lakes. Most communities were relocated from the basin that now forms the lake. The Darien province changed dramatically with the completion of the Pan American Highway into the province. Before the creation of the highway, the mode of trade and transportation between Panama City and the Darien was by boat. The construction of this highway had a number of significant effects. Latino farmers from the interior of the country began to migrate into the Darien in large numbers, effecting demographic shifts and an unprecedented scale of logging and deforestation for the purpose of establishing cattle ranches. It also shifted the economic and political centers of the province from the coastal Darien cities to the new towns being established along the highway by these Latino settlers. Historically, the Embera lived in a dispersed settlement pattern along the river systems of Panama and Colombia. Thatched roof pile dwellings used to be scattered along the river margin. Population densities varied from one river to another, but houses were generally situated at least several hundred meters from one another, with intervening forests and river bends blocking the view of a neighbor's house. By the late 1960s, the government of Omar Torrijos was promoting the settlement of the Darien Embera into communities. The Embera were encouraged to self-organize and form political leadership. Throughout the 1970s, more and more Embera families continued settling into communities and towns. By 1980, discussions were taking place about the establishment of an autonomous territory for the Imbara within the Darien province. The most significant was the construction of the extension of the Pan American Highway, a dirt highway cut through the jungle towards the border of Colombia in 1979. The road opened the region to cars and trucks and offered easy access to people looking for virgin jungle land to clear cut and practice slash and burn farming techniques or to graze cattle. Today, the road is bordered by cattle farms and plantations, and no jungle can be seen for miles on each side. The road offered Waunan and Imbara communities access to the modern world, but in the process destroyed the forest effectively, ending a lifestyle based primarily on hunting and gathering. The result is that indigenous communities now must rely almost entirely on agriculture, and the only method they know is slash and burn. On November 8, 1983, the National Assembly of Panama established a territory of over 4,000 square kilometers. The law established the territory under a collective land title of the Imbara and Wunan people. The leadership structure had a chief as its head. In addition, each district had a regional chief, and individual communities also elected local chiefs. The establishment of the chiefs or Kumarsa conferred on the indigenous people and the indigenous population legal protection of their land from the encroachment of Latino cattle ranchers as well as certain degree of self-governance. In 1985, it was estimated that 25% of Imbara people in Panama still lived according to the traditional dispersed settlement pattern. However, life in settled communities is now considered the norm for most Imbaras. In addition to these settled communities, many Imbara now also live in urban areas. According to the 2010 Panamanian National Census, over one-third of Panamanian Imbara people live in the central province of Panama, and over 25% of the total Panamanian Imbara population reside in urban districts of Panama City. Although now almost all Imbara people live in villages, towns, or urban centers, many established Imbara communities are still found along riverbanks. War, drug trafficking, and guerrilla activities are the other huge factors influencing the migration of Imbara and Wunan communities. In the areas of Darien bordering Colombia, guerrillas and regular army soldiers often cross the border into Panama. These incidents continue today and have caused large number of people to relocate to new communities much closer to the Panama City side of the region. As the water's depth level decreased, the boat started brushing against the pebbles. On a couple of occasions, my taxi driver had to get off the boat and push the boat up. Most indigenous groups in tropical regions of the world use a single large tree trunk to carve narrow dugout canoes. You can see all sizes, from a little fishing canoe for kids less than 6 feet long and barely more than a foot wide to the monster communal boats carved from a 45-foot long, 4-foot wide log. Nearly everyone is an expert at paddling their boats. The boats are essential for transport of cargo and people and for fishing. Young kids learn how to read the current of a river at a very young age. Eventually, we stopped at a place the boat could not go any farther beyond this point. We had to walk for 20 minutes to arrive at the source of this stream. At times, we had to walk within the stream. I wanted to save my sneakers from getting soaked and soaked again. It was getting hard for me to walk in the water. I decided to walk on the sand. Big mistake. It was not sand but mud. I got knee deep into mud and needed others' help to get myself out of this mess. My camera gears were all covered in mud. There was no choice but to rub them against the grass and clean them up with water. I thought that this is the end of my video making because no cameras will work. However, all of my cameras survived this onslaught. We kept on walking and finally we arrived at this beautiful waterfall. During the rainy season, this is a large waterfall but much smaller during the drier months. Here, we took a refreshing bath and escaped the humidity and heat for a while. For trekking in the jungle, many indigenous men around the world choose to wear a loincloth which only covers the genitals. Its simplicity has long been linked to primitivism by missionaries, Westerners, when in fact it is a very practical piece of clothing for tropical jungle environments. Pants and long shirts soaked with mud and water are heavy and burdensome, and they facilitate skin problems such as rashes and infections. Imbara call it anelia. Once we had our fill of the waterfall, we were headed towards our final destination of the day, the Imbara village. We walked all the way back again through jungle and mud, took the boat ride and arrived at the Imbara village. Here we got their traditional welcome by flute and drums. As we got inside their traditional communal house, their spokesperson started explaining about the Imbara culture. He told us that Imbara people have no real religion nor worship any gods. Their ceremonies are limited to body painting and spiritual dancing while wearing traditional dresses. Their houses were traditionally built very high on stilts, up to 10 feet, and are composed of a single room with the fire pit at one end and living space at the other. At those heights, the house was protected from wild animals. It also offered protection from flooding. One or two-sided are closed with walls of bamboo or other wood. Walls offer some privacy, but by leaving half of the house open, breeze serves to cool the house and keep insects from congregating. The roofs are made of thatch. The Imbara people use hagwa fruit to make a black dye to paint their skins. The hagwa is an inedible fruit which is hard and needs to be grated. The pulp is then mixed with a small amount of water and is squeezed to extract a liquid that darkens as it oxidizes. To make it stronger, the liquid is often heated to make it more viscous. Then the hagwa juice is ready to be applied directly on dry skin. It dries in minutes, and the indelible markings cannot be removed with any type of soap, detergent, or chemicals. It remains in the skin until the upper layer of skin is naturally exfoliated by the body. Fish are important staple of the Embera diet along with plantains, and rivers play a central role in daily life for fishing, bathing, transport, and many domestic chores. We were getting really very hungry and it was time for the lunch. First, they gave us a wooden bowl filled with water and lemongrass. We had to dip our hands in the water and clean. Later, my hands felt very clean, smelled so nice and refreshing. First, they provided us with some fruits. These fruits were very fresh, sweet, and juicy. Then we were served with fried fish and plantains wrapped in a palm leaf. The food really tasted great. The Imbara people also hunt for wild boars and trap rodents, which becomes a feast for them. Luckily, none of that was on the menu. After the lunch, we stepped out to see their small village. Their guide told us that crimes in their society are very rare. However, if someone commits a crime and gets caught, depending on the nature of their crime, their feet are placed in this vise and it gets locked. They are forced to stay here under the sun without any clothes for hours, even for days. Until the criminal is placed here, no food or water is provided to him or her. The last time, about 10 years ago, I was here, the women were bare chested. Now they were wearing intricate plastic bead necklaces and ornamental collars made with dozens of coins. These people are famous crafters. Their famous woven basket is made out of a fiber called chunga and is so tightly woven it can hold water. They vary in sizes and colors, but all are labor intensive. Master weavers can take up to 6 months to finish a large piece, which might sell to a collector for over $1,000. Most women make smaller pieces to sell to tourists. Men go into the jungle in search of palm trees. Finding them is the easy part. The difficulty lies in getting the fibers from the top of the palm. The tree trunks are protected by a thick layer of 5-inch long thorns. To get at the top, they cut down a different tree, lean the log up against the palm, and a designated climber scales it like a ladder to reach the palm frond, which he cuts with a machete. Once the palm are cut, men remove the leaves from each stalk and stack them together. Women then strip the spiny edges off to extract the weaving fiber. The fibers must be peeled away in thin strips for weaving. For this, they hold one end between their toes and peel off the outside edge. The fiber is then dried and later colored with natural dyes. Now it was time to celebrate our arrival by dancing. The first dance, we were told, was Mariposa or butterfly dance. This dance is to welcome friends. As the party was over, it was time to leave. We took the boat and left. It was a wonderful trip and I would recommend it to all Panama visitors.